Welcome to Econ 102, where economist Noah Smith and I make sense of what's happening in the news, technology, business, and beyond through the lens of economics. Let's jump right in.
Before we get to today's episode, please note, this information is for general educational purposes only and is not a recommendation to buy, hold, or sell any investment or financial product. Turpentine is an acquisition of A16Z Holdings LLC and is not a bank, investment advisor, or broker-dealer. This podcast includes paid promotional advertisements, and individuals and companies featured or advertised during this podcast are not endorsing AH Capital or any of its affiliates, including but not limited to A16Z Perennial Management LP. Similarly, Turpentine is not endorsing affiliates, individuals, or any entities featured on this podcast. All investments involve risk, including the possible loss of capital. Past performance is no guarantee of future results, and the opinions presented cannot be viewed as an indicator of future performance. Before making decisions with legal, tax, or accounting effects, you should consult appropriate professionals. Information is from sources deemed reliable on the date of publication, but Turpentine does not guarantee its accuracy. Now let's get started.
Hello, sir.
How you doing?
I'm doing great. How about you?
Could be worse.
Yeah, I finally got a haircut myself.
Nice. Oh, wow. You look almost respectable now.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, both of us.
Yeah, I know. Look at us. We grew up. We had to get real jobs. Well, no, you got a real job.
Well, you're crushing the creator life.
Maybe so. Well, we'll see. I gave 4 talks last week.
Really?
It was crazy. Like I was just giving talks everywhere.
The Manifest one.
Yeah, Manifest, Edge Esmeralda, the Commons, and then some SF Future of Media Summit.
Oh, right. I heard Manifest was awesome, by the way. I should have went.
Manifest was pretty good. I was only able to be there for one day. But then, yeah, I saw a lot of people.
So basically, you were saying that you had this talk with Stephen Zhu and you agreed on a bunch of stuff about China, but there was one disagreement?
That's right. So he said that the Hong Kong protests were astroturfed by the CIA and that the CIA handed them umbrellas. I think he got a little confused between the 2014 protests and the 2019 protests. Yeah, it was an unrealistic conspiracy theory that he was touting. And I think, his whole shtick is to say that China is basically invincible. China is this invincible juggernaut that's good at everything. And so we have to structure our, I think he thinks that we have to sort of accommodate that overwhelming power and, And so I think that part of that requires that he imagine that there's no real internal dissent in China. But there is. And Hong Kong, of course, was a huge example of internal dissent. At one point they had 40% of the entire population of Hong Kong in the street on the same day protesting. That's wild.
Yep.
And so it was unrealistic for him to attribute this to CIA, sort of involvement. And so we kind of laughed at him a little bit about that. But the rest of what he said about China being highly effective was true.
And so let's summarize this Stephen Zhu view that there was a wide agreement on. Is it basically this idea that, hey, Stephen's really arguing against Peter Zeihan when Peter says, hey, China's, fucked basically because of demographics, because of sort of, access to food, et cetera. Once sort of, the U.S. stops patrolling the seas in the same way because they get, such a large percentage of their sort of, resources from the Persian Gulf. And Stephen says, hey, actually, China's demographics aren't like that much worse than everybody else. Plus they have like a few decades to prepare for it. Plus they're just, demographics also are not just about quantity, but also quality. And they're just kind of way, better at STEM than we are and better at technology as a result. And what would you edit or add to that view?
So I would say that concerning policing of the seas, that's a complete non-concern. China's Navy can easily police the seas. They can do that. It doesn't cost much. They can do it anytime they want. And they can selectively police the seas so that any commerce with China is protected while any commerce between non-China nations is not protected. They can do that pretty easily, which, gives them an advantage. Whereas America would provide a global public good, China would provide a private good to their own trade. So they can do that if they want. And so far they've shown inclinations to do that, like with the Houthis in the Red Sea. They've said we only care about our trade. We don't care about your trade. So they could do that to try to become like the hub and spoke of global trade, the hub of global trade, because only their own trade is protected. So China's Navy can do that. They have the capability. It's easy. I shouldn't say it's easy, but it's possible, and they've gotten to the point where they can do that. In terms of food, I don't think that's a big problem because, number one, China's not food self-sufficient technically with regards to how much they currently consume. But in wartime, they would cut back a bit on consumption and get a bit less fat and, eat less, yummy, high caloric things, right? And so they do that, and then they'd be fine. So it's not like Japan. Japan actually can be starved out. China's very difficult to starve out. They've got a whole continent, and yeah, they've got a lot of people, but they've got a whole continent-sized country. And then and also, of course, if their population falls in the future, just their land doesn't fall, it becomes even easier to feed, right? But so demographics are a concern. That's a long-term concern, though, because they've got this big bulge, and not a baby boom because fertility rates are still low, but a baby bulge, an echo of a previous fertility boom 2 generations back, coming through the pipeline. The Gen Alpha in China is very big, and they are sort of just now starting to reach working age. And so for the next 5 years, China's going to experience a growth in its working age population, or I guess 3 years, it'll experience actual growth in its working age population. And then afterwards, it won't be until, I would say, 2035 that even their dependency ratio really starts to rise. And then it's not until the mid 2040s or maybe even 2050 before their working age population just starts to fall off a cliff. They're starved of young workers. Their dependency ratio soars. That's all in like somewhere in the mid 2040s. So they've got a good 20 years to run before their demographics really become a major drag on them.
How should we think about the financial situation in terms of the economy? Is Stephen not as worried about sort of the debt or credit situation, or sort of the real estate situation, or how should we think about the economy and the slowdown in productivity and GDP?
So he's not worried, but he should be worried because that, China's economy is not going to collapse. When we use words like collapse, that's not what's going to happen. But China will suffer a persistent drag for, a few more years, at least, from the real estate crash, because there's all this bad debt in the system. Banks don't really know how to lend. More importantly, the local government financing vehicles haven't yet been bailed out. And those, were basically local conglomerates that were doing a lot of stuff and were responsible for a lot of debt. And that problem isn't getting cleaned up. It's not getting better. They'll eventually clean it up. They already started bailing out the banks. They'll eventually bail out the local government financing vehicles too. What you'll get for a few years is trepidation on the part of lenders. So lenders will throw money in manufacturing companies because the government says to, and they've already started doing that. But you've already started to see that pull back. You saw that for a few years, and now you're starting to see lending to manufacturers fall, because what's going to happen is lenders knew how to lend to property developers and real estate. That's what they were good at. Right? They weren't great at lending to manufacturing companies. But now the government's coming in and saying, don't lend to real estate. Well, I mean, the government's not saying don't lend to real estate. They did before, in 2021, but now they're not. They're just saying lend to manufacturers. Go lend to like anyone who's making robots and machine tools and electric cars and chips and planes and whatever, whatever you got. Manufacture it, make it all. China's the make everything country. And so you saw manufacturing loans in like 22 and 23 absolutely just spike. They really soared. And now you're starting to see that taper off because a lot of those loans are going to go bad because China's industrial policy is let a million flowers bloom and then cull all the ones that don't work. Well, most of those don't work, and the banks will be left holding the bag. The problem is when the banks are left holding the bag, they become shy and they pull back, and there's not as much organic sort of like private sector. If you look at the best companies in China, BYD and Huawei and DJI and those companies, Xiaomi, right? You look at like those 4 companies, you see that they're mostly private. I mean, Huawei was affiliated with the security services, but there's a lot of private financing there, and they really sort of came up through this kind of hyper-competitive private sector ecosystem that flourished under Hu Jintao and the very early years of Xi Jinping. And then they won that competition and they came out with a really strong corporate DNA, but they had to they didn't get big government subsidies. They had to like sort of be in the pit and fight and scrap for everything at a time when the government wasn't hurling chunks of money at those kind of things. Okay, so I have friends who invested in Xiaomi early. They were just Americans who went over there and they were like, I want to invest in a Chinese thing, so I'm going to avoid state-sponsored things and invest in a private sector thing. So that was Xiaomi, and BYD similar, and so that could be in danger because now you're getting when the government says give money to every manufacturer. Well, if all you're doing is hunting around for a few national champions that will emerge from that, massive money thing, well, then fine. Okay, you'll get a couple. But the problem is at the same time, you're fucking your financial system because your financial system has just made 1 million non-performing loans. And who's on the hook? It's not the central government. It's the banks themselves and whoever financed that stuff. China's like everybody, it's privatized gains, socialized losses, or no, actually, no, it's socialized gains, privatized losses. But then the privatized losses in the banks become eventually socialized losses if the banks pull back and don't fund like the thing of tomorrow. So this is all. So Victor Shi had a great podcast with Gorkesh recently, which I recommend to everybody. And he talked about all this. So he'll, a lot of what I'm saying comes from him and like 4 or 5 other people like that who keep an eye on this stuff.
We'll continue our interview in a moment after a word from our sponsors.
It's an interesting time for business. Tariff and trade policies are dynamic, supply chains squeezed, and cash flow tighter than ever. If your business can't adapt in real time, you're in a world of hurt. You need total visibility, from global shipments to tariff impacts to real-time cash flow. That's NetSuite by Oracle, your AI-powered business management suite, trusted by over 41,000 businesses. NetSuite is the #1 cloud ERP for many reasons. It brings accounting, financial management, inventory, HR into one suite. With one unified business management suite, there's one source of truth, giving you the visibility and control you need to make quick decisions. With real-time forecasting, you're peering into the future with actionable data. And with AI embedded throughout, you can automate a lot of those everyday tasks, letting your team stay strategic. NetSuite helps you know what's stuck, what it's costing you, and how to pivot fast. If I had needed this product, it's what I'd use. It's one system, full control. Tame the chaos with NetSuite. If your revenues are at least in the 7 figures, download the free ebook, Navigating Global Trade, 3 Insights for Leaders, at netsuite.com/102. That's netsuite.com/102. Let's talk about scaling digital commerce for a moment. When Mr. Beast launched Feastables, he faced a challenge of scale. How do you build an e-commerce infrastructure that can handle millions of concurrent shoppers, process transactions instantly, and maintain stability during massive traffic spikes? The answer turned out to be deceptively simple: Shopify. Here's what's particularly interesting from a technical perspective. Shopify has built what's become the #1 checkout platform on the planet. They've created a system called Shop Pay that's solving one of e-commerce's biggest challenges: cart abandonment. The data shows it's boosting conversions by up to 50%. If you're into growing your business, your commerce platform better be ready to sell wherever your customers are scrolling or strolling. On the web, in your store, in their feed, and everywhere in between, everything's unified in one robust platform. It's a perfect example of how infrastructure, when done right, becomes a competitive advantage. Upgrade your business and get access to the same checkout system that powers Feastables. Sign up for your $1 per month trial period at shopify.com/momentofzen, all lowercase. Nobody does selling better than Shopify, so visit shopify.com/momentofzen today. Shopify.com/momentofzen.
And so what do you think is going to be the sort of fallout on the economic, like what is going to happen as a result of the situation that you've outlined here?
Well, I think that growth will be slowed down a little bit for the next few years at least. And if they don't clean up the problem, and if they just keep creating more zombie loans to sort of try to paper over the last zombie loans, you could have it continue all the way up until like the early 2030s. So in Japan, I'd say it lasted for like 11 years, basically, this financial overhang. I don't see it lasting beyond that. I think that realistically, they'll clean it up completely toward the end of this decade. In the worst case scenario, they'll clean it up in the beginning of next. But it will be cleaned up. The banks will be cleaned up. The local government financing vehicles will be cleaned up, and all this stuff will be fixed. It'll just take a little while because China is a big country. It's a diverse country with lots of diverse stakeholders. And you've got one guy trying to micromanage things at the top, but he's not the smartest guy. And at the same time, you've got just like a lot of local people who kind of want to protect their own investments from the real estate boom years, or grab some government subsidies for the manufacturing boom years. And so then, who don't necessarily have the macroeconomic health of the system in front of mind. So I think that's basically the story. You'll get a headwind for 3 to 5 more years, maybe 3 or 5 more years, headwind on growth. And I couldn't name an exact amount. If you look at Rhodium Group or something like that, they'll tell you maybe like 1.5% headwind on growth or something like that. That looks pretty accurate. Meanwhile, you've got a general slowdown from just the end of catch-up growth, demographics. Demographics aren't severe, but China is not as, it's not a growing young country. The demographic dividend is gone. And so you get, that's a little bit of a headwind. And then there's tariffs, there's all this stuff, global sort of trade disruptions, and et cetera, et cetera. So I think that, so China's facing a bunch of headwinds, and we can't expect to see like torrid growth, but in technological sectors, like every high-tech sector that we care about, China will show surprising strength because they've got a lot of smart people who have spent the last 20 years working incredibly hard and coming up through an incredibly competitive ecosystem. In terms of quality of human capital, that is true now, and that will not be true in 25 years. I mean, it'll still be somewhat true. Like China's not going to become a bunch of dum-dums in the next 25 years, but a lot of things will change. And you saw this in Japan. Japan has never stopped being one of the top 2, math education countries on the planet. Right? Like Japan is just really great at like math. Their students test really well at like math and science and all that stuff. However, what you saw in Japan was as the population radically aged, then old people were in charge of all the big companies. And the people managing all the Panasonic and Sony and Toyota and whatnot all became a bunch of old farts. And there was no real room for young people to move up because there weren't enough young people, and there were sort of too many old people for all the available spots. And old people just clogged the ranks of upper management. And you basically had very few young people. And so you have fewer young people, you have fewer ideas, you have less ferment. And the young people who are there spend a lot of their time being gophers for the old people. There's not as many people, within big existing corporations. BYD looks like a world beater today, and DJI and Huawei and Xiaomi, right? Those founders will die or age out, or they'll age into like uncreativity and senility, or they'll just die, or they'll retire, or whatever. And then the sort of the guys who come in after that will be lifers, corporate lifers who came up through the ranks, and all of their sort of like, people around them who just sort of, they knew how to succeed in the system where someone else was deciding what to build, and they were mainly tasked with how to build. But now it'll be their decision to decide what to build. And at that point in the 2040s, you're going to see other companies, Indian companies, maybe American companies. Again, maybe we can get back on our feet. Companies from elsewhere just competing with Chinese companies and inventing new things, maybe AI based, maybe, some sort of disruption, technological disruption. And like happened to Japan, unless you believe innovation will just stop and AI is the last thing we'll ever invent and it's done, basically, which is an argument that Kai-Fu Lee made, and it's stupid. He made that before ChatGPT. But so we can talk about that. But unless you believe that innovation is not going to happen and that there's no other country that has the human capital to compete with China, and China's got all the smart guys and nobody else has all the smart guys, that's approximately true today. But, it's never been the case that one country or one group of people or whatever monopolizes human capital over the long term. It's just never happened, right? Europeans thought that only Europeans can make things. Only we can invent engines and machines, and maybe some Americans who are descended from us and have frequent contact with us, maybe they can engineer stuff and make machines too. But Japanese people, they could never do that, or whatever, or Koreans, they're not even on our radar. But now, Japanese and Korean engineering in many fields actually surpassed European engineering, and Europe is not number one country in math and science anymore. And so the worm turns on this human capital. And if you look at, that guy Camus,
the philosopher?
No, Camus, the internet shit poster, much less important, but still a dude.
Yeah,
he did the manifest, and And so Krem, as we call him, because we don't like to say French things all day, Krem showed evidence that China has much, much more sort of negative correlation between human capital and fertility rates by geography in China. So the places where China had, like where all the talent in China went, have catastrophically low fertility. We're talking like 0.7 children. We're talking about like, decreased by 2/3 in like a generation fertility. That's how low their fertility is. And if you look at where Chinese fertility is actually doing a lot better, or, not at replacement, but maybe closer to it, you're talking about very poor areas where the human capital left a while ago to go to the big cities.
Let's segue to the drone stuff. Is there any path for, like, what should the U.S. do about Chinese drone manufacturing and DJI supremacy? How can we make U.S. drone manufacturing competitive again? Is there a path for that?
Yes. And so this is what my talk at Edge Esmeralda was about. And it was with Sam D'Amico, whom you know, whom we should definitely get on our podcast as much as possible. Sam talked about the electric tech stack. So basically, there were two basic big clusters of engineering for the longest time. And those were combustion engineering, which would include, cars and planes and engines and things like that on one hand. And then on the other hand, there was electrical engineering, which would include circuits and semiconductors and all these things. And so they're different, but China never mastered combustion engineering. Chinese, like combustion cars, like typical cars, suck. And China has never figured out how to make a good jet engine. Russia knows, China doesn't know. And so that sort of whole branch of engineering was holding China back. And so they went around it. They said, you know what? Screw it. We're just going to use electric motors and electricity instead. And because of several key inventions, they were able to. So in the late 90s and early 2000s, we invented three important things. The first thing, lithium-ion batteries. Lithium-ion batteries allow us to carry around much, much, much more energy in a battery than we used to be able to, and they allow us to charge and recharge the battery much faster and many more times before you kill the battery than old rechargeable batteries did. And it's just a real like magic battery. And so then we've been iteratively improving on those since we invented them, and they're much better than they used to be. So that's the first one. The second one is electric motors. So we started using permanent magnets, especially neodymium permanent magnets. And those allow a magnet to hold its charge for much longer and hold a lot more magnetic charge. Basically, you can have a really, really freaking strong magnet that lasts for a really long time. And finally, we invented kinds of transistors that can work under incredibly high current loads so that you can use electronics to sort of dynamically regulate an actual electric motor while it's powering a car or a drone or even a plane. And those are called power electronics. And so we invented all three of those things in like the late 20th century or the 2000s, right? And all those things came together to make battery-powered drones that are now dominating the battlefield of Ukraine and just destroyed a bunch of Russian nuclear bombers. They make electric cars that are now pushing out ICE cars and have raised China to be the #1 auto manufacturer in the world. And they're powering, of course, they power phones. That's why China's really good at phones. And then increasingly, so robots basically are just a battery, an electric motor, and some computer chips. That's what a robot is now. And you've got injection molded plastic, you got carbon fiber things, you got these basic materials things. That stuff's all really easy. You just do it at scale, right? It's just easy comparatively. But the hard stuff is just like batteries, motor, chips. It's the electric tech stack, those three key inventions. And China has mastered all of them. They are the masters of all three of those things because the chips are not the leading edge semiconductors that we focus so much on that like power AI computation. They are the trailing edge semiconductors that are, like that China can make in huge volumes. So China controls those three things. And because they control those three things, every combustion thing that can be replaced by an electric thing is being replaced by China. By BYD, by Xiaomi, by CATL, by DJI, by these companies. They are replacing combustion. And Germany's screwed because Germany was the master of combustion, best combustion engineering in the world. They had the best engines in the world for hundreds of years. They invented the car. They, invented the jet. And then they kept being really good at all this stuff. And now it's just being obsoleted. Right. Obviously, commercial aviation will still use combustion because it's very high power. But even then, you have electricity making inroads. We have Ian Brooke replacing part of the combustion infrastructure with electrical engineering. With In's company, which is Astromechanic. So then, anyway,
Nope.
Yeah, the electric tech stack is replacing combustion in a wide variety of occupations because we can get energy density, we can get high power, and we can get fine control with the power electronics that you can't even get with combustion. And so this is what Sam and I talked about at Edge Esmeralda. We talked about how if America wants to get manufacturing back, we need to compete on the electric tech stack. We need to make batteries and motors and power electronics in America. And not only that, we need to make the things that provide the demand for those things, electric vehicles. And of course, Sam's trying to do battery powered appliances and make that a thing, but also drones, basically EVs, drones, robots, and also machine tools. Battery powered machine tools are going to be really big. And so we can make all that stuff, right? It doesn't, it's not insanely difficult stuff that only math geniuses could do. This is not like cutting edge AI, right? Like your average engineer coming out of Michigan State can make this shit. All right, it's fine. You don't need super geniuses who know how to do advanced math. But we need lots of them and we need lots of this stuff. And the problem is, there's problems on the Democrats. We talk about that a lot with allowing things to be built and land use and all the good old stuff, right? Abundance. But the biggest problem is that Republicans have decided that batteries are wimpy energy. We don't want this. It's green. It's climate stuff. It's the climate hoax. And they've decided this. And so they're canceling all these subsidies and they're ceding the field to China completely, because yes, you can, yes, eventually the market will, electric tech will win in the market if you let it win, right? You don't need subsidies for this tech to take over in the long run. But if you want America to control that tech instead of China, you damn well do need subsidies. And so you can't just say, well, let the market handle it. If it's really good technology, it'll win in the market. Yes, it'll win in the market, but it'll be BYD, Cattle, Xiaomi, and DJI that win in the market. It will not be, Tesla and, whatever, American companies, G and GM or whoever, Impulse, I don't know, whoever ends up making this stuff, AstraMechanica, without subsidies, without, infrastructure support and things like that, America can't compete in the electric tech stack that's cannibalizing the old combustion tech stack.
Right. And so let's say more or go deeper on the plan to make it competitive. One thing we've talked about in the past is how do we get Trump to be more pro solar, support electricity more broadly, but so let's say more about what we should do about all this that we've outlined.
Solar is useful for the electric tech stack for two reasons. So first of all, you don't need it for you don't need solar for the electric tech stack. You could power it all on coal, as China mostly does, honestly. China's building a lot of solar, but right now they mostly run on coal. So China is charging its batteries with coal and it's making all this electric stuff with coal. We could do that, but the problem is, so in the long run, solar will help in two ways. The first is that it's a lot easier to charge a battery with solar because solar gives direct electricity, so it's more efficient. Coal, you want to turn a turbine, right? But to get coal into electricity, you've got to burn coal, to boil water, to turn some gears, to turn a magnet, to charge a battery. Okay, there's efficiency losses at every step of the way there. But with solar, it's just light hits thing generates a current because of semiconductors in the panel, and that current goes directly into your battery. Done. Basically just one step. And so that's why solar really works well with charging batteries efficiently. Also, because solar is intermittent, sometimes it's winter, sometimes it's night, sometimes it's cloudy and rainy. Because of those things, you need batteries to smooth out the solar. So Brian Potter had an amazing post estimating just how much batteries we'll need and just how much solar we can get. And the short answer is that depending on how cheap things get, we can get to 60 or 80% solar for our grid, depending on how cheap like batteries mainly get. And then the rest of the stuff will have to have like supplemental like gas plants and stuff. But solar needs batteries to even it out. Okay. And that provides demand, market demand to scale up battery manufacturing so we can be cost competitive in battery manufacturing. Remember, scale matters in manufacturing. Andrew, I'm looking at you guys. Okay. Anyway, Elon knows this. He knows that scale matters. Like, that's why he calls everything a gigafactory, right? That's why he's trying to make as many starships as possible. It's not because he needs all the starships. It's so that he can learn how to make starships cheaply. It's for learning by doing. And so scale is what matters. So solar needs batteries. And so you get the scale to build batteries. Now, they're not exactly the same kind of battery you're going to use in every application. There's different kinds of batteries in every application, but some of the things you can cross-apply. And so that's why solar is important. But solar isn't like, it's useful. It's great. It's not the number one thing we need to be doing for the electric tech stack. The number one thing we need to be doing is batteries. Okay. And we need to be a rival to China in the manufacture of lithium ion batteries, lithium iron phosphate batteries, and whatever other batteries we can make. We need to do that. Currently, Tesla makes a lot of batteries, so America makes batteries because of Tesla. Elon Musk needs to help us scale this up. And Elon Musk needs to convince the old guys in the Trump administration that batteries are actually like power. Batteries are power. Batteries just took out nuclear bombers in Russia. 4,000 kilometers from the Ukrainian border. Batteries took out nuclear bombers. Okay, those are battery-powered drones.
And so what are the bottlenecks as it relates to batteries, or why aren't we there yet? What could get us there?
We need land use. We need gigafactories. That can be done. Elon's done it, so it obviously can be done in America. We need final demand. We need guaranteed demand. So what we need to do is support the EV industry, because the EV and the drone industry, because those two industries are the final purchasers for a lot of batteries. And we need a domestic phone industry as well. We need industrial policy, Biden-style industrial policy, but without all the progressive everything bagel shit that held it back. We need a Republican version of Biden-style industrial policy where we do advanced purchasing guarantees, demand guarantees, that say, if you want this, here's a subsidy for electric vehicles so that we can guarantee demand for batteries so that we can make all these battery factories. Because the battery is like, I don't know, half the value of an electric car or thereabouts, and half the weight. And like, yeah, so or less than half the weight, but a lot of the weight. But then, yeah, so battery factories were mushrooming up all across the American South, all in these red states. It was all red states that were building the batteries because they have more liberal land use restrictions, more, I should say, permissive land use restrictions in the red states. And Trump is killing those subsidies, and those factories are now shuttering because of uncertainty, not just because of tariffs, a little bit because of tariffs, but mostly because, the electric vehicle subsidies provided the demand guarantee for these guys to say, you know what, I'm investing in this factory and hiring all these people and doing all this huge capital expenditure. I'm going to have demand at the end of the day because of this, we're doing this big EV push. Now they're not. So Trump needs to go do Biden-style industrial policy for electric tech, but without the everything bagel that says that, you get, you have to have this many BIPOC contractors, and you have to have this many union workers, and you have to have this community engagement process and all this stuff that Ezra Klein bitches about all the time. And they need to have industrial policy without the progressive, sort of load on it.
Are we able to switch to renewables? Or say more about what needs to happen for the energy transition to take place?
Right. So like I said, the most important thing for American manufacturing is not renewables as such. It's not even solar. It is batteries. It is electric physical tech. It is batteries, motors, and power electronics. That's what it is. And all the things that those goes in, like electric cars and robots and everything that Elon builds. Elon understands the electric tech stack in a way that I would argue no one else in America really does yet, at least not in positions of power. Elon understands it better than Democrats, better than Republicans, better than anyone. So Elon needs, and he's been trying to explain it on Twitter, but the problem is Elon is so focused on seeming like a bro that he doesn't let his internal nerd come out, so he can't do nerdy explanations. Which is why, maybe people in the future can listen to a nerdy guy like Sam D'Amico who, just will talk like a nerd. But, Elon has an infinitely bigger platform than guys like that. And so Elon needs to let out his internal nerd and start explaining this to people in the Republican Party, in the conservative movement, because it's real power. And this is going to determine who rules the world.
Yeah, I mean, to that end, going back to Elon, why are Tesla and SpaceX the only companies who can manufacture frontier tech at scale in the US?
Well, okay, so we should note SpaceX is actually combustion. That's actually not electric tech. But so it's interesting that Elon has done it in both realms. He's done an electric stuff and combustion. So that's amazing. The reason is because Elon is a singular talent for overwhelming bottlenecks. And there's there's like, the way D'Amico puts it is, he says that there's 20 bottlenecks in between us and making these things. And you have one Elon who's good enough to overwhelm 20 bottlenecks. And then you have a whole bunch of guys who are sub-Elons, we call them, sub-Elons who are only good enough to overwhelm 15 bottlenecks, but not 20. And then you have a bunch of sub-Elons that are only good enough to overwhelm 10 bottlenecks instead of 20, right? So for example, Jeff Bezos, we know he's good, right? We know Jeff Bezos is a great entrepreneur. He built one of the world's leading companies, and yet Blue Origin has it's starting to do better now, but it has really, really lagged SpaceX by a ton. And even though it has, one of the best entrepreneurs in the world working on it, because he's, when it comes to physical tech, he's a sub-Elon. Arguably better than Elon at software, but when it comes to physical tech, there are a couple bottlenecks in there that Elon knew how to overwhelm that Bezos did not, and never could. And then he finally started to figure that out after like years and years. But that's how hard it was. We have too many bottlenecks. We need to eliminate all these bottlenecks so that we can, instead of one Elon, we can get 20 sub-Elons. And so what are those bottlenecks? Land use is a gigantic bottleneck. Allowing factories to be built. Housing land use is really important because you need the engineers who work the factories to live near the factories, and you need the factory workers to live and work near the factories. Okay? So you need the factory workers to live near the engineers. And where can they afford to do that? Where can they afford to do that in America? Like, Austin, that's it. You can have engineers live in Austin, and then you can have factory workers live in the cheap suburbs to the south of Austin and commute, right? And you can have all those people. So south of Austin is our best bet to be Shenzhen, American Shenzhen. But there's very few places where that happens. In California, you can do manufacturing in the Central Valley, right? But then the problem is, where do the engineers live? If the engineers live in the Bay Area, that's a big commute out to the Central Valley. It's too far. You could have California forever, with Jan Schramek and those guys up there build manufacturing stuff. And then you could have the engineers live in Sacramento and Davis, and they could be right there. And then you could have, the factory workers live in Vacaville. You could have that. And then that's a thing you could do. But there's relatively few places in America where you can do that because we haven't fixed land use. So we need to fix land use in America. That's like a huge part of the bottleneck. We need to and permitting, we need to have this stuff be able to be built in 6 months instead of 5 years, right? 5 years is too long. All the defenders of NEPA and CEQA and all that stuff say, oh, look, these people complete these things. Usually they complete it in under 3 years. Like, shut the hell up. 3 years? Build it in 6 months. You need to just be able to throw this stuff up. And of course, for government involved, you need industrial policy, but for government involvement, we need to get rid of these contracting requirements. The everything bagel, we need to stop saying you need this many BIPOC contractors and this many union workers and this much community engagement. We need to slim that down and say you only need a couple little things, and then you can go for it, go. And so we need that. We need a critical mass of suppliers here. So we need to do industrial policy up and down the value chain and basically figure out, okay, if we want batteries, we need not just the things that use batteries, but the things that go into batteries, like metal processing. So actually, to his credit, Trump hasn't been thinking about that. He's been thinking about upstream, because if there's one thing that Trump and his people do understand, it's like mining. They understand the simplest thing in the world, mining. Okay, it's not the simplest thing in the world. There's a lot of chemicals and engineering and equipment involved, but they understand it conceptually, if not technologically. And so they do understand the importance of these critical minerals, but it's still going to take a while. So we need to do that, the upstream stuff and the downstream stuff. We need education. We need a lot of mid-level engineers here. I'm not talking about, your top like AI talent that can go make $3 million a year working for OpenAI. I'm not talking about that. I'm talking about, your dude who graduated from Michigan State and like knows a bit of chemistry and can figure out how to make like a lithium ion battery at some factory a little bit cheaper, or set up or how to set up a factory so it's a little more efficient. I'm talking about those people. We need a lot of those people. We need targeted education for a broad STEM workforce. I don't just mean have everyone learn to code and major in computer science. I mean, have everyone learn to chemistry and learn to circuit design and learn to do factory setup and things like that. And I'm not saying everyone learn to do that. We just need some people to learn to do that. And they don't have to be the most brilliant people in the country. We just need a lot of them. Stop studying like communications and business and start studying how to be like a sort of a basic factory engineer. So we need that education and human capital as well. Yeah, so those are some of the bottlenecks we need to overwhelm.
Yeah. This sounds like, like a comprehensive plan. Do you think we're up for it? Do you think the knowledge is there, the interest is there, the awareness is there?
It is there among the elite, because elite people have started talking about all this stuff for a while now, and it's starting to crystallize. You see documents appearing, like Kelvin used the techno-industrial playbook, which is great. It's a great document. And you're seeing people involved in manufacturing and promoting manufacturing all start to converge on these ideas. You're seeing a lot of people, you're seeing liberals and progressives start to understand it, but you're also seeing some conservatives start to understand it, or in Cass does not understand it.
Exactly.
But
I'm kidding.
Yeah, maybe you can help with this, man, because like I feel like you know some tech right people.
We'll continue our interview in a moment after a word from our sponsors.
Every time I hop on the 101 freeway in SF, I look up at the various tech billboards and think, damn, turpentine should definitely be up there. And I bet I'm not alone. In a world of endless scrolling and ad blockers, sometimes the most powerful way to reach people is in the real world. That's where AdQuick comes in. The easiest way to book out-of-home ads, like billboards, vehicle wraps, and airport displays. The same way you would order an Uber. Started by Instacart alums, AdQuick was born from their own personal struggles to book and measure ad success. AdQuick's audience targeting, campaign management, and analytics bring the precision and efficiency of digital to the real world. Ready to get your brand the attention it deserves? Visit adquick.com today to start reaching your customers in the real world. Again, that's adquick.com.
So I will say that when you look at the political left and the political right, there's a very clear regularity, which is that the left fights over ideology while the right fights over personalities every single time. Right, like people, the guys in charge of the right always can't stand each other and fall out and like assassinate each other and whatever. Whereas the left will fight over ideology. So actually, yeah. So then, and I say that loosely because you see communists sometimes fight over personalities when they become, you have like Stalin was definitely temperamentally on the right, even if he was, affiliated with the left. And so he became a guy who fought over personality, whereas Lenin would fight people over ideologies, right? And so, but you see the right fragmenting over personalities. You saw in the Spanish Civil War, all the generals who, were against the Republic, all the nationalist generals, Franco, Mola, Sanjurjo, like all these guys fought each other, and then Franco killed all the others. And that was why Franco is the generalissimo who ruled Spain for decades and decades after winning the Spanish Civil War, is because he just killed his rivals.
Let's close it out with that. We can get deeper into it in future episodes. But this was a great overview on all things China, all things energy, and a look inside the sort of the latest conflict. Noah, as always, great episode. Until next time.
Until next time.
Econ 102 is a podcast from Turpentine, the network behind Moment of Zen, In the Arena, The Cognitive Revolution, and more. If you like what you hear, subscribe and leave us a review in the App Store. You can keep up with both of our Substacks for written analysis of the topics we cover in the show at noahopinion.substack.com and eriktorenberg.substack.com. Thanks for listening.